Today, I'm going to rank every Red Dead Redemption 2 Epilogue mission in a tier list, starting from the worst missions and going all the way up to the best missions. 95% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe as we'll be posting tier lists very often. In 21st place, I've got the Home of the Gentry. I feel like this is a pretty boring mission, but I actually kind of love the fact that Uncle comes back. All you do is you go up to these guys and you either give them money and then you just ride back and you go to the bank, and then that kind of finishes off the cutscene. I just think in general there's really no gameplay here and you're just riding back and forth, and even like the cutscenes here aren't really that interesting besides meeting Uncle again. So I feel like this mission is pretty bad, and I feel like the only reason it's not like the worst mission ever is just because Uncle comes back and there's literally no gameplay during this mission. So this one to me has to go in D tier. Uncle's the only reason it's not in F tier. In 20th place, I've got Trying Again from the Epilogue Part 2. While it does seem like a nice kind of father-son bonding moment, there's not really much bonding going on between Jack and John. I feel like Jack kind of just reminisces over his old times with Arthur the entire time, and like I guess they are bonding over like Arthur and Jose and all these other people, but they're not really like bonding together. And then Jack eventually just leaves to go find Rufus. And while there are some kind of interesting dialogue choices when John is sucking out the venom from Rufus, I feel like this whole mission isn't all that interesting. I just feel like it's a little funny and weird, and just overall it isn't that interesting, and it's pretty boring in terms of gameplay, so it's really held back by that. And I don't know, there's just not really much going on in this mission, so this one definitely also has to go into D tier. In 19th place, I got Simple Pleasures from the Epilogue Part 1. Again, this mission is pretty boring, but it shows a lot of the frustrations between Abigail and John, and how he's mad at her for being so strict on what he does, while she's kind of mad at him for basically doing anything related to gunslinging, which I feel like is a little over encumbering, but overall, I don't know. I feel like this mission is not all that interesting. You just kind of milk the cow and shove her manure. And while it does kind of build up John trying to be a rancher and trying to be this good guy for Abigail and for Jack, it doesn't really do anything, and it's not really that fun to play itself. And, of course, missions always need to be at least kind of fun. So I think this one also has to go into D tier. In 18th place, I've got The Wheel from Epilogue Part 1. Well, this one, a lot of other people might say it's a little better because it's like the first mission of Epilogue Part 1. This mission is pretty boring, and it's basically just a hold the sprint button mission the entire time. I feel like when I actually went to Pronghorn Ranch, it was just super boring because you're just spamming the sprint button the entire time and just wanting to get it done as quick as possible. While there are a couple fun points where you like kick out the Laramie boys, and it does well to advance the story further, I feel like it doesn't really do much, and I feel like it's really boring. But I do like the whole setup of Abigail wanting to get John to escape his like gunslinging path, but he always goes back to it, which really reminds me of like both Hosea and Arthur's relationships with Mary and Bessie. But overall, it doesn't really do much for me, and I feel like this mission is just super boring, so definitely has to go into D tier. In 17th place, I got Home Improvement for Beginners. This one is from Epilogue Part 2, and there is some great dialogue from both John and Uncle in this mission, but come on, cannot be a mission to you, Rockstar. This is literally 17 seconds long. Someone else recorded it, and it was 17 seconds long, and it's like the gold medal is to get under 17 seconds long. Like, you could have easily combined it with something else, but instead you have a mission where you literally just spam the sprint button or whatever the button is here, and it's on for 17 seconds. Well, I mean, yeah, I think the cutscenes are great. This is just not really a mission to me, and you could have just added to something else to make that mission more interesting, but this mission as a mission itself is not interesting at all, and it's super boring, so this one definitely also has to go into C tier. In 16th place, I've got Gainful Employment from the Epilogue Part 1. I feel like this mission is also kind of boring at points, but while it is really nice to meet Sadie again, and I feel like that really kind of brings it up a notch, it's basically just spam sprint until you catch up to Kirk. There's not really much going on with his like bounty, and each replay of the mission, you kind of know exactly where it is. I feel like the first time you play it is kind of cool to like search out the town and try and find where he is and all that, but when you do it again, it's like, exactly he's in like that main center or whatever in Strawberry, and then you go up to him. It's pretty fast, and just like overall, there's not really much gameplay going on besides spamming sprint and getting your lasso out ready to catch him. So I don't know. It is cool to see Sadie again, but I feel like the rest of the gameplay during this mission isn't really that fun. So this one also definitely has to go into C tier. In 15th place, I've got Motherhood from Epilogue Part 1. I kind of like that Abigail really just took Jack and left. I mean, I think that's a good thing, and it really builds John as a character because he wants to do things to like bring her and Jack back. But I don't really think the mission itself is that interesting, and I think Sadie being introduced back into the story is also pretty cool. But yeah, again, there's not really much gameplay going on. And I just think this one really sets up some of these other missions with like talking to David Geddes and just, Abigail leaving and then Sadie coming back really builds into Epilogue Part 2, which I feel like is a really solid chapter. So this one definitely also has to go into C tier. In 14th place, we got Farming for Beginners, also from Epilogue Part 1. The mission itself is pretty short and not all that interesting, but I do like the whole bull thing, even though it does get really annoying because you're not allowed to like catch this guy on the first couple of lasso throws, which is also just really stupid by Rockstar. Why can't you catch this guy immediately? I don't know, but I guess I kind of get it. Like, they want it to do a lot more, but there's not really that much to do during this mission, and because you can't catch the bull immediately, I think it does get a little annoying at points because he just automatically shrugs off your stuff, even if you throw the greatest lasso throw of all time. So, I don't know. It's cool at parts, and I do kind of like the catching the bull mechanic. I feel like it is kind of unique compared to other missions, but because there's not really that much going on, I think this one also has to go into C tier. In 13th place, I've got a really big bastard from Epilogue Part 2. There are some solid moments with Sadie throughout this entire mission, but there's not that much actual gameplay. It's just kind of hold sprint mission like a lot of these other ones are. The bear part is pretty cool though, and I feel like the bounty hunters trying to take your bounty is really interesting the first time you go through it. But again, like with some of these other missions, when you do it more and more, these surprises don't really hit as hard, and it kind of loses its charm because every time I redo it, it's just like, oh, I'm just going to hit Deadeye and hit these two guys in the head before they can even say anything. So, I don't know. It's a cool mission. It's nice to be with Sadie, but I don't really think it's anything that special. So this one also has to go into C tier. In 12th place, I've got a quick favor for an old friend, also from Epilogue Part 2. This one does drag a little bit compared to especially some of the other bounty missions. And while the Ramon Cortez getting out of jail part is kind of interesting and there are a ton of different shootouts, I feel like they're all not that interesting. They're all just kind of really generic and boring. And while it just drags on way too much for me. And I think there are some really good points, especially with Uncle at the beginning of the thing. It's like, you don't build a barn, dumbass. And it's like, I love that part with Uncle, and I just feel like all the cutscenes with Uncle in this one are really cool. And, being with Sadie for part of it is pretty fun, but I just think the shootouts and all that is really boring and generic, and it's just not that fun to actually capture Cortez because it just drags on so much where I don't care at the end. Like, I know John needs the money, but you can get money in other places. So I don't know. It's an okay mission. It's definitely B tier to me, but it's nothing special, and it definitely is a little bit over long for what it needs to be. In 11th place, we've got An Honest Day's Labors from the Epilogue Part 2. There's a solid shootout getting James Langton, and I love just going down the canyon and fighting off all of his men if that's what you pick. But this mission is just pretty straightforward, and I feel like it's just a kind of regular bounty mission, just a little bit upsized. It's also, I feel like all the bounties aren't really that interesting, but there is some nice camaraderie with Sadie, but again, this mission isn't all that interesting and doesn't really do that much to push forward the story, besides showing that John is just getting more money. This one also has to go into B tier. In 10th place, I've got Old Habits from Epilogue Part 1. It's a very short mission, but I love kind of beating up this Laramie, beating the shit out of this guy, and then his boys always just make fun of him exactly when John's beating him up. They're like, boss, he's really getting you, boss. And it's like that part is so funny. It also just shows the rift in priorities between Abigail and John. And Abigail, I think, low-key seems a little stupid in this one because beating up the Laramie guy is really warranted. And I feel like everything she does, it's like, John, you can't do anything related to punching someone or shooting someone or anything like that, even if it's part of your job. It's like, bro, come on. Just let him do some things, especially the things that protect the ranch, because that is part of his job. So I think this one is a B tier mission. While it is really short, it is pretty fun for the time it's actually there. In 9th place, I've got Fatherhood for Beginners from the Epilogue Part 1. It's a pretty interesting mission where you learn a lot about Mr. Geddes and his wife's relationship, where she lets him sleep with the prostitutes and he lets her sleep with the ranch hands. The beginning of the mission is pretty okay with tiring out Jeremiah and just taking the full out. But I feel like the end is really fun. It's nice to kind of bond with Jack in this mission. I feel like this one is even better mission than the one in Epilogue Part 2. I feel like there's just a lot better bonding here, and there's a lot of good time to take in the beautiful geography of Big Valley, because it's just, you go nice and slow with Jack, and I don't know, it's pretty fun to do, and I think it really shows off the beauty of Big Valley. In 8th place, I got Bareknuckle Friendships from Epilogue Part 2. It's a pretty solid mission. I love meeting up with Charles again. Charles is just one of my favorite characters, and meeting up with him again here, it's like, oh my god, this guy's finally going to put John on the right track again. And while the gameplay itself during this mission is kind of sparse, I feel like there's a great job of like the dialogue with Charles, educating the player on what happened with like Arthur and all that, and what Charles has been doing. And just like, I don't know, it kind of works to educate the player with certain things. And I don't know, I really like it. And I think escaping the city is just a little too easy. Like, they're like, oh my god, the Saint Denis police are all in Guido Martelli's pocket. But it's like, bro, it's the easiest thing to get out of there. Charles just drives out, and you don't even have to like shoot at anyone. I don't know. It's just too easy to me. But overall, I really like this mission, and I really like the way it like tells you about things without like getting in your face about it. So this one definitely has to go into B tier. In 7th place, I've got A New Future Imagined from Epilogue Part 2. While there's almost no actual gameplay throughout this entire mission, this mission is just extremely heartwarming, and I just love seeing John actually be sentimental for once. And this mission also really does well to mirror Arthur and Mary's mission during Chapter 4, except this time it kind of ends in a pretty happy moment. And I really love the fact that like John uses Arthur's ring to propose. And I don't know, I just love this mission. I feel like it's really heartwarming, and it kind of fully wraps up John and Abigail's story to set it up perfectly for Red Dead Redemption 1. So this one has to go into A tier. In 6th place, I've got Milton Rides again from the Epilogue Part 1. The shootout itself is pretty boring and generic, but I love Abigail's performance in this one, where she's just so happy John doesn't use his guns first, and then when he actually has to do something for the ranch, she's just disgusted, and John uses his weapons to clear out the Laramie gang, which, I mean, I kind of understand at that point, but at the same time, it's like, he's literally under contract with Mr. Geddes to do stuff like this. I mean, Abe goes out with him, so I don't know. It's a pretty cool mission, and I feel like the shootout is kind of cool, and you get to beat the shit out of the Laramie guy at the end, and I mean, I guess shoot him after that. So I don't know. I feel like this one's pretty cool, and I really like the fact that John starts like gunslinging again in this mission. So this one also has to go into A tier. In 5th place, I've got A New Jerusalem from Epilogue Part 2. I really love the house building song in this one, and the song just goes way too hard to not have this go into something like A tier. I love the camaraderie between Charles, Uncle, and John during this mission, and it's great for John to actually have like accomplished something in the game that's positive. I feel like the entire time it's like, you know, he's trying to do something positive, but just never works out for him. And even while he is a super lucky guy, it just never happens. I don't know. This is just a really fun mission, but of course, like the gameplay is really lacking. But I mean, either way, it's still fun to just listen to the song and do the stuff with Charles and Uncle and just have like a really fun time doing that. So this one definitely has to go into A tier. In 4th place, I got Fatherhood for Idiots from Epilogue Part 1. This mission is really good. I love the interactions between John and Abigail and how it kind of foreshadows John's gangster past, eventually coming back to kill them at Beecher Hope. And I just love the part where you're going back to Pronghorn Ranch, and Jack's like, is there a guy behind me? And John's like looking back there, and you have this sinister music, the guy's following behind you, and every single time, it's not one of those things where it's like, I mean, you kind of know what's going to happen, like when you play multiple times through, but every time it's like, oh shit, there's someone following us this entire time, and they're coming to take out John. I mean, you kind of see it, like they do some good foreshadowing where the guy in the beginning is like, yo, did this guy just say John Marston? I don't know. I really love this mission. I feel like it's one of the more unique ones just because they do put in this kind of like following sinister mechanic. I don't really know if it's like a mechanic, but it's pretty cool either way. I think this one definitely has to go into A tier just because it's so cool and unique. And, you know, I love doing this mission with Jack. In 3rd place, I've got the Toolbox from Epilogue Part 2. There's a great introduction to the Skinner brothers. It really shows their brutality in everything they do. There's a solid shootout where it kind of transitions from the trees into trying to find Mr. Wayne and saving him. I just love Mr. Wayne as a character, even though he's only in this one chapter. You have this guy who's just yapping his ass off to you. He's like, yo, I'm do this. I'm this big shotgun guy, and then he just dies brutally right in front of you, and like John and Charles have to save him. And I mean, they probably could have done that on their own, but it's just like, I don't know, it's really interesting to see that Mr. Wayne is like this really nice guy. He has a family and all that, and then he just immediately dies after that. And it's kind of just like a really interesting scare and shows why you should hate the Skinners a lot because they do this super brutal things. And this one also does a good job of setting up Uncle's bad day because there's a nice big like difference in between these missions where there's like a lot of time in between them, and John and Charles and Uncle, they do a lot of things in between this, and then it's like, oh shit, Uncle's bad day, the Skinners are really still in the area. I don't know, it's really cool. I really think I like how they set it up, so this one's definitely going in A tier. In second place, about Uncle's Bad Day from Epilogue Part 2. The beginning of the mission is pretty fun, seeing John, Charles, and Uncle all having fun and just doing random shit. The shootout itself isn't that fun, fighting your way out of the Skinner's camp, just kind of shooting the people on the ridges. But I love like the love and care that both John and Charles have for Uncle, where Charles is like, maybe we just put him out of his misery if the Skinners did any really, really bad things to him. Even though he does just like annoy them a lot, they still want to see him safe and go after him to save him. I mean, it's kind of the Vanderlyn gang mentality. But it's also nice to see Uncle not be his like normal sarcastic self for at least a little bit, because it shows a different side to his character. I just think overall it's just a great mission, and especially on the first playthrough, I love this mission because it surprises you, because you kind of forgot about the Skinners too since the Toolbox mission, because there's a bunch in between, and then they come back and they hit you so hard with that. So this one also definitely has to go into A tier, but I definitely love this mission. In first place, there's no other mission it can be besides American Venom from Epilogue Part 2. This mission is great. While the start might be pretty slow and pretty monotonous with finding Cleet and just fighting your way up the mountain, when Sadie gets stabbed and like Charles out of business, this mission becomes amazing. The soundtrack, the vibe of the snow, just getting ready to take on Micah alone is amazing. While the stakes do kind of feel low with Sadie receiving a terrible injury and shaking off like nothing, and Charles just getting a shoulder wound, going there to kill Micah is so much fun when you see Dutch come out and eventually kills Micah. Like, it makes you kind of really happy and sad at the same time, seeing that Dutch isn't going to be with Micah, but at the same time, he picked Micah all those years ago instead of Arthur. Overall, this is a great mission that I feel like fully completes Red Dead Redemption 2, even though it does do a few cop-outs to kind of make it work well for Red Dead Redemption 1. I think it does, work really well to set up these kind of nice happy endings and just set up Red Dead Redemption 1 in general. And the epilogue also, I mean, I don't really know if you count this part of the mission, but at the end, they show the epilogue in the credits, and it does a good job of wrapping up a lot of these other Vanderlyn gang members' stories and sets the player up really well for Red Dead Redemption 1 if they play that next. So this one 100% has to go into S tier. I just love this mission. I feel like it's one of the best in all of Red Dead Redemption 2. So that wraps up my Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue mission tier list. Let me know what you guys would change. And if you guys do want to see more content like this, subscribe, as we'll be posting a lot more of these missions videos. I'm definitely going to be doing one on Red Dead Redemption 1. I'm going to be wrapping this one with my other main story, Red Dead Redemption 2 one, to make one big video.